This is evening class. I confused with IS3.2, right? IS3.2. Right, IS3.2 now IS3.1, right? This evening. Okay, so IS3.1, we have 39 people on the list, right? Okay, and so we have one more week to go before the Khmer New Year break, right? So next week will be the last week before the break for Khmer New Year, and we will today we will discuss more, right? The introduction to meta theoretical debates in IR and in social science in general. So last week we discussed science and social science, right? As a foundation of social science, right? We look at some definition, basic assumptions, and the nature of science and scientific explanation, various approaches to knowledge and scientific knowledge, and after that we look at the nature of social science, right? And the positivist model of science, which the positivists claim to be applicable in the field of social science as well, right? So they insist that the scientific method used in the natural science field must be used also in the field of social science, in the study of society. And so these become the kinds of dominant way of thinking about knowledge, about theories, and so on from the 1960s, right? And positivism has dominated our field, our academic scholarship for many decades already, until the mid 1980s, when there was the fourth debate, right? The fourth meta theoretical debate in IR and in social science in general. Positivist model of science started to be challenged by the post-positivist group. And the variant in this group would include interpretivist group, the reflectivist, right? And so we have such term as post-positivism, interpretivism, and reflectivism, right? So they are in the same group here, right? They reject, all they share is that they reject positivist model of science as valid, the only valid model of science, right? And then we look beyond the four debates, right, and rethink, and we start to rethinking of IR as a science, scientific inquiry, right? And here we look at two other groups. One is the scientific realist, scientific realism, and the other one is critical realist or critical realism, right? What they share in common is that science should not be committed to a dogmatic insistence on the certainty of its claims, but rather should rest on a commitment to constant critique, right? So what they suggest is that the discipline in the social science or in any science, right, not just in the social science but also in the natural science, should develop its own modes of operation and its own analytical framework, its own discipline by themselves, right? Because there are no universal scientific method to be adopted by all sciences. No universal method. And so one method may be applicable in one discipline or field of study, but may not be applicable in other. What they are saying is that the positivists insistent to use their modes of their scientific model, right? May be problematic and may be misleading. So the positivists saying that the scientific method used in natural science must be used in also social science as well. Otherwise, the theory, the concepts in social science cannot be considered scientific mode of inquiry, scientific knowledge, or scientific theory. And that is the point here. And then, so in this, in our discussion today, we will look at what is meta theory and the role of meta theoretical debates in social science and in IR, social science in general and specifically in IR, right? So we will look at the question whether IR is a science or an art. If it is a science, then you follow the positivist model of science. Then if you are saying that IR is only an art, not a science, then you tend to follow the interpretivist model of scientific explanation, or the kind of reflectivist one. And what does the scientific study of world politics entail? Right? These are two questions that we will focus on in here, and we will try to look at how positivism came to dominate our academic scholarship from especially the 1960s on, especially in the United States and elsewhere, right, in the West in general, and then until the mid 1980s when positivist model of science started to be challenged by this. Then we look at the philosophy of social science in IR, the influence of the philosophical debates of social science in IR. The cross-cutting issue here is, can IR be or should be a form of inquiry based on scientific principles, right? Or in other words, should IR as a discipline follow the positivist model of science? Or should we also incorporate other model of science like the interpretivist or reflectivist? That is the point here. So we will be looking at four meta-theoretical debates in IR and in social science in general. The first science debate, the first debate of here happened before and during World War II. Here we focus on the roles of international institutions, for example, the League of Nations and the UN as well, the role of the UN in keeping peace and stability of the world, and how to ameliorate the causes of war, for example, right? And so here the debate involved two groups: the idealists, which focus on institution, procedure, and practices that could eradicate or at least control war in international system. They look for a better way to organize international affairs. For example, they look to Woodrow Wilson's 14-point plan, right, for a new post-war order, and so on, right? So here we look at these kind of emergence of arbitrary school of international politics department. The philosophy of science at that time was not fully established as an academic field of study, right? And the other side is realists, who challenge the idealists on scientific knowledge they produce is an unsystematic and value-laden. For example, E.H. Carr and Hans Mogens. The second scientific debate happened from the 1960s, right, and was influenced mainly by behaviorism in psychology. The behaviorist revolution in social science was also the starting point. The behaviorists favor the positivist model of science. the behaviorist favor positivism is synonymous for science, right? And the other group called traditionalists, who favor more humanistic methodology, and thus they favor interpretivist or reflectivist model of scientific explanation, right? And then from the 1960s, we observed that there seemed to be a general consensus that the positivist model of scientific explanation or scientific inquiry seem to be promoted and adopted widely, right? And from here, you would see that philosophy of science has been developed as a kind of academic field from that time on. Okay, and then the third debate happened from the 1970s until the 1980s, and this science debate was called inter-paradigm debate. And this happened especially during the period of tension of the Cold War, right? And thus they focus on disagreements among realists, pluralists, and Marxists on how best to understand and explain international processes. They move away from methodological issue of the science of the 1960s, and they focus on the choice of theory, which theory we should choose among realism, pluralism, and Marxism, right? And so here, realists say something like this, while pluralists say something like that, and the Marxists also say something for their own sake. And thus, which paradigm we should choose to follow, right? And the theory was actually influenced by politics, right? Because the world at that time was polarized by two blocks of ideology, as you know, right? The communist bloc and the capitalist bloc. And thus, academic debates was also divided and polarized by this kind of political polarization as well, right? And so here, the third debate. The fourth debate, right, and beyond, started from the mid-1980s, and that focused on deep-seated disagreement about what the discipline of IR should study and how IR should study it. Okay, and so here from the mid-1980s until the end of the Cold War, they come back to the methodological issue again. They talk about epistemological position in IR again. And here we look at the point like explaining and understanding in science, positivism and post-positivism, and rationalism and reflectivism, Robert Cohen, for example. And after that, we look beyond the four debate. Here we include two other groups, mainly the scientific realists and the critical realists. These two groups are classified together because they share many points in common. Their core argument is that science should not be committed to a dogmatic insistence on the certainty of its claims, but rather should rest on a commitment to constant critique. That's a kind of idea of synthesis, right? And so what they are saying here is that the positivist model is not absolutely correct. The post-positivist model is also no exception as well. And thus, all fields, all disciplines should develop their modes of operation by themselves. They should not follow particular model or particular paradigm all the time. They should be flexible and open-minded. They should be open up to new criticism and constant verification with new finding, new theory, right? Because scientific realism realized that human knowledge is fallible. What we claim to know now may not be true all the time. There will be new theory, new form of knowledge that come to challenge the old one. So human knowledge is flawed and limited all the time. There is no certainty of human knowledge. Okay, and thus, from this point, we explore key implications of meta-theoretical debates and differences in IR theory. We look at the types of theory. We look at the question of objectivity. We look at series testing and series comparison. And last point, we look at the relationship between theory and practice. At the end, the author conclude that series resemble salespeople. Series are like salespeople. They develop their own marketing strategy in order to sell their product, and their product are series itself, right? Series, and so series use their marketing strategy to sell their product or their series. So they would use marketing word like critical, sophisticated, simplistic, naive, and dogmatic, right? And these words are neutral description and not neutral description of theoretical position, but they are used to either delegitimate alternative theory or view or prove the superiority of their own view or theory or product over the other. And thus, we as the reader, the audience, should be very careful in which theory we should choose, which theory we should follow, and which model we should adopt. But we also have to think about the problem of relativism, right? We should not say that all theories are the same. No one is correct, no one is wrong. This is a problem of relativism. Okay, when we cannot distinguish between good or bad, right and wrong, black and white, and thus problem of relativism is a big problem as well, and thus we should be aware of this. Okay. All right. So this is just a short introduction and a brief summary of what we are going to focus on in this session, right? On thinking theoretically in IR and the social science, right? And so let me open up to your question. And I hope all of you have finished your reading of the assignment, reading assignment in reading 1 in the first book, and chapter 1 and introduction, chapter 1, and reading 2 in the second book, chapter 2 of the book, right? And also you have gone through my lecture note, both the first and second lecture notes already. And so if you still have any other question now, you may raise your question. Let me check your name along the way while you're thinking of this, okay? Yeah. So we have 38 online now, and we have 39 people on the list. So say not here, right? Say not here.
Yes.
Yeah, and Retirit here. Table Dom.
Yes, teacher.
Yeah. Mùi Vui.
Here, teacher. Here. Udam here, teacher.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, Mùi Vui here. Siet Nan, right? Siet Nan also here.
Yes, like.
Yeah, and Chai Long also here.
Yes, sir, I'm here, sir.
Yeah, and Supanya here.
Yes, like.
And Soisal here. Yeah, Darlene here.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Darlene here, and Dane here. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Ponyorot here. Ponyorot here. Kim Boromai. Yeah, Kim Boromai here. Yeah. And Suchita here. Yeah. And Sawan Pachita here. Yeah. And,
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Nirot here. Dahlia. Right, Dahlia here. Not there, right? Dahlia, not there. And Prasati here. Sarati here. Mỹ Hoi here. And Vulnerable here as well, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Vulnerable. And then Putirat, right?
Yes,
Putirat.
yes.
Yeah, and Vitamin.
Yes, sir.
Right, yeah, Vitamin here, and Conita here. Yeah.
Yes.
Tuan here. Rani here. Then we have Sun Hu, right? Sun Hu here as well. Then Vimian, right? Vimian also here. Sun Hu. Yeah. Sun Hu here. Yeah, Vimian here. And Somatay here, right?
Yes, sir.
Rang Say here. Tida.
Yes.
Yeah, Virabot here. Chandanit, right? Here.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. Supetna here. Siti,
Yeah, like.
yeah, here. And
Yes.
Periya here. And Satyanit
Yeah, cha.
here.
Yes.
Yeah, and Senasa here. And
Yes.
Radavin, right? The last one, Radavin here. So,
Yes, sir.
yeah, right? So anyone can hear your
Hello,
name?
sir.
Yeah,
Hello, sir.
yeah,
My
go.
name is Samnan, sir.
Sầm Nang, right? Sầm Nang. Yeah, Sầm Nang here, yeah, here.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Sầm Nang here, right? Okay.
Sir, Satikon also here, sir.
Yeah, Sedikun, right? Okay, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, here, Sedikun, right? So only Dahlia, right? Dahlia is not on line now yet. Okay. All right, so that's it, right? For your attendance here. And so any questions, any problem with the text? And so far we discussed meta series and meta theoretical debate, right? And I remember someone asked about meta series, right? So again, meta series is series about series. In short, series about series. So that means the topic matter for meta series is not a real world problem. We are not talking about poverty, about love, about relationship, about economic growth, about crime or anything. What we talk about is our topic matter is series itself, right? We talk about series. We discuss the validity, the reliability of the theory, the applicability of the theory, the relationship between theory and practice, theory and realities, and so on. This is called meta theory. And here we are doing meta theoretical debate in IR and social science in general. We are looking at various paradigms, theoretical proposition, and how they influence the field of IR as a discipline, right? And the central question is whether IR is a science or an art, and how can we make IR as a discipline a kind of scientific inquiry based on scientific principle. In other words, how can we apply the positivist model of science in IR? Okay, and so this is the central question in our discussion today. And if you go through my lecture note, the second one, you will get all of the discussion that I just mentioned, right? That I just mentioned. You look at the four meta theoretical debate in IR. So happened from the Second World War, the first debate, until the 1960s, the second debate, until the 1980s, 70s and 80s, the third debate, and the fourth debate seemed to be from the mid 1980s, which focus on the epistemological issue again in IR. Okay, and thus after looking at these four meta-theoretical debates, we can explore and examine the key implication of meta-theoretical differences in IR theory. Right, the types of theory, we have explanatory theory, we have critical theory, we have the normative theory, and we have the theory as a lens through which we look at the world, right? The constitutive theory, how is it constituted, for example? And right, and so here is what we can hear. But in all, we can group the IR series in three main groups: the mainstream one, the critical groups, and the non-Western, as I just mentioned here. Then we look at question of objectivity. We look at that. Okay, so then we look at theory testing and theory comparison, right? Right, and then the theory relationship between theory and practice, as you mentioned here. Okay. So here that's what we are talking about in here. Okay. All right. So anything? Yeah. Okay, so I look at the chat room. We have a question from Minh Hoi again, right? So Minh Hoi asks two questions. What is positivism and pluralism? I think the question is similar to the question that I think was asked last week. What is positivism, right? And pluralism, right? And here another question is what is the English school? I think that the second question is something that you already study in year 1 or year 2. I think the English school. When you study realism, you study mainstream IR theory like realism, liberalism, and economic structuralism, then you would also have to look at the English school, right? Okay, I will talk about that. But first, let me go to the first question. Question number 1, right? What is positivism? And again, uh, positivism started to dominate academic scholarship from the 1960s on, from the second debate in the 1960s. You see, it's a model of science and scientific inquiry, modes of scientific inquiry based on positivist model, started to dominate academic scholarship, research program, and the meaning of scientific knowledge in all university, right? Especially in the West from the 1960s on, right? So positivism was influenced and shaped by empiricism, the idea that human knowledge is derived mainly solely from sensory experiences. And thus, from this idea, all form of human knowledge must be verifiable with real experience in the real world, right? That is the epistemological position of the empiricists. When here the positivists who are influenced by the empiricists extend this idea to apply it in the research methodology. And here that the positivist model of science become this kind of thing, right? That they focus on several basic assumptions, positivist group, right? So first, the positivists think that the scientific model or scientific method used in natural science like mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, engineering, and so on. The scientific model used in the natural science or physical science are applicable in the study of society in social sciences, right? And so the positivists insist that, right? ពួកគេទទូចថាត្រូវតែប្រើ model របស់គាត់ model of science របស់គាត់នៅក្នុង social science as well. So they claim that if a scientific method is not used in the social science, then the theory produced in the social science may not be considered scientific. That's the basic point in positivism, right? Positivism. And thus, from this position, they claim some key assumption here. One is that science must be focused on systematic observation. Here, what they refer to as scientific method. That means must be focused on systematic observation, right? And thus, your observation must be systematic, logical, rigorous, and also some kind of objective, right? So the positivists insist that observation alone is not enough, right? Reasoning alone is not enough. Philosophical reasoning alone is not enough, right? It's not guaranteed that you get the objective scientific knowledge. Positivists insist that there must be systematic, logical, rigorous, and objective study or research program before we can claim any theory or any form of knowledge to be valid true, and scientific. Thus, positivists insist that from your observation of the real society or the real world out there, you must develop your scientific study of it. So what you should do is that starting from your own crude observation, then you are impressed by many things around you in your society and in the world around you. You are impressed by many things. You want to know many things around you. Then you start to read about it. You do literature review about it. Then after doing literature review, you find a gap of knowledge that you want to know, and no other people also don't know. Then you form your research question. After forming your research question, you do some more literature review in order to form your theoretical framework or conceptual framework. Then you form your hypothesis, right? You form your hypothesis to be confirmed or to be rejected. After this, you design your research program, your sampling technique, sampling size, data collecting methods, right? And where to collect your data and how to collect your data, right? And you go to your field work to collect your data. After that, you collect a handful of data and come back. You analyze your data to find the patterns, to find the regularities, to find the generalization. And after that, you verify you test your hypothesis, right? You confirm or you reject your hypothesis. And after this, you make generalization and you build a theory. And even after you build your theory, you keep on testing and verifying your theory with new finding. And this is what they mean by systematic, objective, logical procedure or modes of inquiry or scientific method, right? What they mean by this. The positivists insist that this scientific method must be followed and used in all sciences, both the natural sciences and also the social sciences, right? The positivist stand is that there must be sufficient empirical data to reveal regularity that are indicative of the operation of a general law, right, or theory, before you claim something to be true or to be scientific. So positivists would insist that you go to the field work, collect empirical data until you find the generalization and regularity, and you claim your theory. Otherwise, they don't buy your theory, positivist model of science. And one more thing is the criteria of objectivity that positivists really focus on. That is what the positivism is all about, right? The criteria of objectivity. Here in the natural or physical science, objectivity is everything about it. For example, in mathematics, you see, 2 plus 2 must be 4. A square plus B square must be C square, for example. Right? That's what they mean by objectivity, right? Objective, that is, it is independent and free from our feeling, our emotion, our idea about it, our perspective about it, right? True is true, right? Regardless of who say the truth, regardless of your idea about it, but it remains true over time and in different society and in different culture. That's what they mean by objective or objectivity. So the positivists want to see this kind of objectivity not just in the natural or physical science, but also in the social science. And thus, they saying that they bring the positivist model of science from the natural or physical science into the social science. And they insist that social scientists, including IR scholars, must use their positivist model of science in their study of society. And thus, for example, if social scientists want to study poverty, the concept of poverty is not measurable. How can you measure poverty? The positivists say you must study poverty in crude number. You must find a way to measure poverty. Otherwise, people will say different things about poverty and it's not scientific, right? People have different idea about it. and it vary according to their emotion, their feeling, their cultural background, and so on. Thus, we cannot consider this form of subjective knowledge to be scientific. The positivists say you must find way to measure poverty in numerical data, right? And then the positivists develop operationalization of concept. What you study in your research methodology, you see, you are taught to operationalize concept into measurable variable anyat, right? In order to find a variable, you have to find indicators. So you're not call indicator. For example, poverty, one indicator of poverty should be income, right? And that you see, the World Bank and IMF would come up with poverty line. They set poverty line at $2 per day for some country, with their PPP, right? And for Cambodia, it used to be 1.25 in the past. Then it was up to $1.75 per day, and now it's $2 per day, right? And that if you earn less than $2 per day, you are living under the poverty line. Income is an indicator that become a variable to measure poverty in a country. You see? So positivist model of scientific explanation is this kind of thing. To study poverty in a society, you need to develop that kind of variable or indicator that allow you to measure poverty in numerical data. You see? And then social scientists like in the field of economics, right? Economists would say they use this kind of model. They measure it. Then positivists insist that this would be the result that you get would be objective, right? You would get the percentage of people living under poverty line, right? Based on their income, based on this kind of thing. But then people in the social science, the other group, the post-positivists, think that the positivist model of science that follow in order to study poverty is misleading and limited, right? And is not valid as well. You cannot study poverty by just looking at the income alone. This is quite misleading. Okay, why? Because poverty alone is not the only indicator of poverty. I mean, income alone is not the indicator of poverty. So some people being studied may earn less than $2 per day, or maybe only $2 per day. They have small business that earn less than that, but they may not be poor. One is because they have real estate, for example, right? Real estate worth of a fortune or millions of dollars, for example. So they are not really poor under the poverty line, for example. Right? And some people who have a lot of money may not feel that they are rich when they do a lot of comparison. They do a lot of social comparison. They always compare themselves to billionaire. How can they feel rich? For example, those people are much richer than them. And so sometimes it's a matter of how we feel about ourselves. Some people who have a lot of money are still in need. They need more, they want more, right? Their ambition would bring down their feeling of wealthiness and so on. And so this is a matter of study in social science. You cannot achieve 100% objectivity in social science. Okay, so the post-positivist group or the interpretivist or the reflectivist group, they are the same. They all reject positivist model of science. They are saying that positivist model of science is not valid in the study of society. It's not. Is very misleading and limited in the study of society, and in social science in general, right? And so here is a matter of that. The third point, the positivist group refrain from talking about reality or truth that are not observable or unobservable reality. They don't focus on unobservable reality, right? And they call this non-observable. And so philosophical reasoning, discourses, and social structure are some example of non-observable. And positivists say there is no way to achieve objectivity of these kind of non-observable. They are just instruments for you to describe the observable reality that can be measured in numerical number or data. So positivists refrain from talking about that. Positivists would be some kind of realist in this, but they are not naive realists, for sure, right? So the positivist motto is to be perceived, right? Non-observable are just instruments. But what we have to find is the objective observable reality that we can measure in numerical data that can yield some result independent of our feeling, right? Of the researcher's feeling, emotion, cultural background, perspective, ideas, and so on, right? And that is what they mean by scientific knowledge, right? Or scientific method, and so on. So positivist model of science has been dominant in our academic scholarship in various disciplines now, right? Until nowadays, if you look at a research program and study in all university around the world, you would see that positivist models still dominate our way of thinking about that. Scholar would question the objectivity of your research finding or your theory and so on. They question the methodology, you see, because they are influenced by the positivist model of science, the positivism, right? And thus, your political science professor, even your sociological professor, right, professor of sociology and so on, they would focus on the methodology that you use to arrive at your research finding. Positivist model, okay? And so this is positivism. Now in IR, the question remains whether we should follow positivist model of inquiry or model of science or positivist mode of inquiry, or we should also look to the alternative one, that is the post-positivist one, or the interpretivist or reflectivist model, right? Or modes of inquiry, which focus more on humanistic methodology rather than on scientific method all the time, right? That what I just mentioned here. So positivism and post-positivism still on the front line of debate, right? And if you look at the balance of perspective now, seem to be tipped in favor of post-positivist model now, right? Because many scholars are fed up with positivist model, and they say we should look beyond positivist model of science, because science is not that kind of fit to objectivity all the time. Nothing is fixed in this world, right? And so scientists who follow the positivist model seem to claim that their theory, their form of knowledge are absolute true, while there is no absolute truth in this world, right? While there is no absolute truth. Human knowledge is fallible. And the theory that we hold to be true for a long time may be challenged by a new theory. Even in physical science or natural science, the law and theory that we hold to be true for many centuries has been challenged by another new theory. For example, laws of gravitation by Isaac Newton that explain the movement of object in this world, and we all accept it, right? And the laws of gravitation, which was discovered and published by Isaac Newton from the early 17th century until the early 20th century, when Albert Einstein published his theory of general relativity, that the world came to realize that laws of gravitation is quite limited and misleading as well to explain the movement of object in this world. And Einstein himself even mocked at laws of gravitation. He said, laws of gravitation is responsible only for the falling of object, but is not responsible for you falling in love, right? So what, it sounds funny, but what he really means is that relativism is a better choice, right? in explaining the movement of object, right, in relation to space and time, right? And laws of gravitation pay no attention to space and time, right? They considered space and time is absolute while space and time are relative, and that is the essence of general relativity in here. Now, 100 years later, theory of general relativity of Albert Einstein seemed to be challenged by another theory now, quantum physics, which is now the new one that really challenge general relativity. Right? If you want to know more, then you may take the course History of Scientific Ideas. Right? This course is quite interesting. I took the course in Yale University, right? And you might wonder, I study in Japan, but I could take the course at Yale University and at that time and transfer the credit to my university because our university had some kind of MOU, right? That we allow each student in both university to take the course and transfer the credit. So I recommend that, right? If you want to know more about history of scientific theory of scientific ideas, then take this course then. Okay, so that's it, right? Positivism and post-positivism in this. I hope I can give you some and post-positivism now. And is it clear now? If you have any other thing with this? All right, so now let me go to the second question a little bit because you asked about the English school of IR series, right? The English school, because here, the English school of international relations series. Sometimes people, some scholars use the word liberal realism because this is a combination of the two. And sometimes they call it specifically as the International Society School. Or some people would use the British institutionalism, right? And in general, it is known as the English school, right? And so these English schools of international relations theory maintain that there is a society of state at the international level, right? Then, despite the condition of anarchy, here, the English school still agree with realists that international system is a system of anarchy, right? The lack of global ruler or world state or world government. We do not have world government. The UN is not a world government, but only we have a world governance, not world government, right? The English school stand for that kind of conviction that ideas, rather than simply material capability, shape the conduct of international politics, right? But they still accept that material capability also influence the behavior of state. But rather than this, they say idea also have an influence on the behavioral pattern of the state. And thus, at international system or international level, there is a society of state. And that society shapes the behavior of each member, right? And so the society of state deserve analysis and critique as well. So in this sense, the English schools seem to be very close to constructivism school, right? Constructivism. But the English school has its root more in world history, in international law, and political theory, right? And English school is more open to normative approaches rather than the constructivist approach, right? So that's what the English school is all about. And then in the English school, you look at what? You look at international system, you look at international society, and you look at world society. There are three main dimensions here. What is international system? So here the international system here refer to a form or two or more state, right? Would come together and form what they call the international system. So the classical English school here start with the realist assumption that the international system, the assumption of an international system that form as soon as two or more states have a sufficient amount of interaction, right? So international system would be formed as long as two or more states have sufficient amount of interaction. So international system is a general word that underlines the English school tradition of realism and power politics. And it puts international anarchy at the center of international relations theory. So international system here. For example, Hadley Bull define international system as being formed when two or more states have sufficient contact or a relationship between them, and so on. How about international society? What they mean by that? And the same scholar Hadley Bull say states share certain common interests, usually the fear of unrestricted violence and war, and being exploited, being bullied, for example. And so these kind of fear lead to the development of a certain set of rules to regulate behavior and conduct of state, right? To prevent state from doing something unlawful, for example. And then he defined international society as existent when a group of state, or more generally a group of independent political community, right? We not merely form a system, but in the sense that the behavior of each is necessary factor for the calculation of other through their interaction. This group of states have been established by dialogue or consent, common rule, institution, right, for the conduct of their relation. So here, what they focus on is the international institution. For example, rule of justice, international law, convention, treaties, right, agreement, and so on, right? And they have to recognize their common interest in maintaining their international institution and arrangement. This is what they mean by international society. Okay, and how about world society? Okay, world society. And here, the one who actually introduced the idea about world society is Kant, right? Immanuel Kant, right? So the concept of world society take the global population as a whole as the basis for global identity. And this clearly influenced by cosmopolitan philosophy. The idea that we should consider ourselves as a world citizen, not citizen of one particular nation or state, right? So Buzan argued also that the concept of world society was actually what he called Cinderella concept of English school theory, right? And here it's not really the focus of attention in international relations theory actually, right? And so here I just give you a brief look at what the English school is all about. Some people think that the English School of International Relations series seem to be the theory of everything in international politics. It seems to be able to explain everything because it incorporates, it includes the analysis framework from the analytical frame from realism, from liberalism, from constructivism, right, and so on. And so it borrows the frame from others and combine it with normative theory, right? Combine it with the normative approach, international law, and world history. And thus, the English school is more comprehensive and more extended and broad in its explanatory power or scope, right? In English school here. Right, but some people would say the English school seems to be a little bit misleading and lack of clear analytical frame in a way that it seemed to be a little bit interdisciplinary and also not clear about the specific point. But for the scholar of the English school, they say the point that define the English school is international society, right, and society of state. That here, this is quite similar to the sociological approach to the study of society. So the English school focus mainly on this kind of thing. Okay, so that the English school, and what you should have studied a lot from second years or first year or second year when you look at the mainstream IR series. Okay, so here the what I can share with you, Minh Huy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, teacher.
Okay. Okay, Radhavin asked the question. I have one question. When using series as critique, what does it mean when it refers to relationship or series with the world? I think your question is not really clear, but I think you talk about the gap between theory and practice, or the relationship between theory and reality, right? In reality, because what is theory then? You have to be we have to go back a little bit and look at the definition of theory as we discussed last week, right? And you can look at this in my first lecture note. Theory is a what? General statement that describe and explain the causes of or effects of classes of phenomena. Okay, so theory not only describe but explain the causes or effects of classes of phenomena. A causes B, B causes C, or what? So when we talk about theory, we always look at that kind of causal relationship, right? By causal relationship, we mean the relationship between A to B, right? A causes B or B causes C. What causes the Second World War, for example? And then you have a theory that, for example, economic crisis causes war. This is a theory, you see. So as long as you have a causal relationship between two phenomenon or two phenomena or two event, then this is a theory. So theory are composed of causal law or hypothesis. So in one theory, there may be many causal laws or hypotheses, right? Or explanation or antecedent condition, right? Based on Stephen Avera. Theory also may be defined as a formal, logical explanation of some events that include prediction of how things relate to one another. Okay. Right? Again, a formal and logical explanation of some events that include prediction of how things relate to one another. For example, you want to explain the coup d'etat in Cambodia in the 1970, when when Prince Sihanouk government was overthrown, right? And so you want to explain the coup d'etat. And what you mean by explanation is that kinds of causal relationship. What causes the coup? What caused the coup d'etat to happen? And you might come up with some antecedent condition. For example, corruption in the government. For example, the influence of the Cold War, right? The communist movement in Cambodia, for example. And so you may come up with various variable or antecedent condition that you think would contribute to the event of coup d'etat in the 1970s. And combine all of this, you get the causal explanation or causal relationship between the coup d'etat and those antecedent conditions. This is called theory, right? This is called theory. And thus, in theory, what we mean by explanation is this kind of causal relationship between A and B, between phenomenon A and phenomenon B. Okay, that's what we mean by that kind of here. Theory explain reality in the real world there by allow us to see the relationship between two phenomena or two events. Okay, so in scientific explanation, when we use the word explanation, we mean by what we mean is causal relationship. A causes B or B causes C, like that, right? And that we see the relationship between two reality in the real society or the real world out there, and we try to explain it. Okay, so that's what we mean by explanation. Some people confuse between explanation and description, right? And you have to pay attention to the difference between the two words, explanation and description. You cannot mistaken description for explanation. You cannot just give a description of the event and you say you are explaining it. No, right? So some people just describe the phenomenon about the coup data in Cambodia. On this day, this happened. On that day, this happened, that happened, and that is the end. That is only description of the event, not the explanation of the event. So in science, when we say explanation, when we say we are explaining something, we must find the causal relationship between two phenomena. Phenomenon A and phenomenon B, whether A causes B or B causes A, for example, right? So what caused the coup d'etat in the 1970 in Cambodia? Then you might come up with many antecedent condition or variable, right? That you think have some kind of causal relationship with the coup d'etat in the 1970. And that is what a thing like that. So if you study economic growth, then you would find some antecedent condition. You would find some variable that lead to economic growth. For example, you may relate, for example, government policy, natural resource, education, and so on, technology, and so on, to economic growth, and you study it, right? And this is then your research finding would be a kind of theory that you argue, right? Your argument for that. And here, this is what we mean by theory, and that theory relate to phenomena, right, in our society or in the real world, and give us some kind of explanation, right? An explanation. Theory may contain many hypotheses, right, and point of contention. For example, the theory about the movement of the movement of the Earth around the Sun. You see, that's kind of theory, right? In cosmology, right? And the teach that goes contradictory to the teaching of the church that the Earth is flat, and something like that. But the new theory that was published by Galileo say that the Earth was round, for example. And so the two theories come into conflict, and the result is that Galileo was sentenced to death, right? When he was accused of trying to go against the teaching of the church at that time. The dominant paradigm was the teaching of the church at that time, right? So here the theory may cause that, may means that, something like that, right? So theory is some kind of representation of the reality in the world, explaining the reality in the world. Theory. Without theory, there would be no academic study without theory, and any study will not be called academic if it lacks some kind of theory. It lacks of some kind of theoretical explanation. Okay, and this is the significance and the value of theory. See, people in the marketplace may talk about many facts, many things they know, and they think that they are very knowledgeable because they know many things. But in our academic field, that is not enough. To deal with crude fact is the lowest level of knowledge. what we should be able to talk about is the kind of meaningful theoretical discussion of fact, right? So how can we cook fact using our theoretical frame? It's a lens through which we look at the world. Okay? And so theory goes beyond fact, explain the fact, explain the relationship between or among facts, and help us to understand deeply, more deeply about the meaning of life and the essence of the world around us. Okay, that is theory, the importance of theory. And theory is something that defines us from them, being an academician and layperson or normal people. Okay, and it's kind of thing like that. Okay, so that's it, right? What I can share with you, Davin. Is it clear now?
Loud and clear, sir. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, I think because of time, right? Now it should be time for break. And if you have any other question, you may raise them later on other platform like Facebook group or here or email or something like that, right? So thank you for the question and thank you for joining today, right? And the rest of the time for your self-study. If you haven't finished your readings, please try to finish everything. Next week, we will move on to the next part of our course, and that would be critical theory and postmodernism. Okay, and I will upload reading material for you on your Facebook group and also my lecture note on your Google Classroom later, right after this class. So please try to finish everything before we move on to the next chapter, the next part of our course, critical theory and postmodernism. And that's goodbye for now and stay safe all together, right? And see you next week. Right. Thank you. Goodbye. Yeah. Who is that?
I was late when you
Who is that?
My name is Maria.
Oh, okay. Dalia, right? Dalia was late a bit. Okay, I get it. Thank you. Right.
Thank you.
All right. So Dalia late. Okay. Yeah. Okay, here Dalia. Okay, so that's it, right? Okay, so that's it, right, for now, and see you next week. And please spend the rest of the time for your self-study, right, and your academic purpose. And see you next week. All right. Goodbye.